The Senate will come to order. I ask everyone present to please rise and recite the Pledge of Allegiance. I pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all. In the absence of clergy, let us bow our heads in a moment of silent reflection or prayer. Reading of the journal.
In Senate, Wednesday, February 2nd, 2022, the Senate met pursuant to adjournment. The journal of Tuesday, February 1st, 2022 was read and approved. On motion, the Senate adjourned.
Without objection, the journal stands approved as read. Presentation of petitions. Messages from the Assembly. Secretary will read. Messages from the Governor. Reports of standing committees. Reports of select committees. Communications and reports from state offices. Motions and resolutions. Senator Gianaris.
Mr. President, on behalf of Senator Parker, on page 15, I offer the following amendments to Calendar 125, Senate 2838B, and ask that said bill retain its place on the third reading calendar.
The amendments have been received and the bill will retain its place in the third reading calendar.
Let's move on to the calendar, please.
Secretary will read.
Calendar number 421, Senate Print.
Lay the bill aside.
Calendar number 423, Senate Print 8197.
Lay the bill aside.
Is there a message of necessity at the desk?
There is a message of necessity at the desk.
Move to accept the message of necessity.
All those in favor of accepting the message, please signify by saying aye.
Aye.
Opposed, nay. The message is accepted. The message is accepted. Senator Gianaris.
Okay, I believe it's laid aside, Senator Lanza? Yes, sir. Okay, please lay that bill aside.
Lay the bill aside.
Now let's take up the controversial calendar.
Secretary will ring the bell. Secretary will read.
Calendar number 421, Senate Print 8185A by Senator Gianaris, enactment of the state law.
Senator Lanza, why do you rise?
Mr. President, would the sponsor yield for some questions?
Does the sponsor yield?
Yes, he does.
Sponsor yields.
Thank you. Through you, Mr. President. Would the sponsor consider himself the prime author of these maps? No. Would the sponsor yield?
Will the sponsor yield?
Yes.
Sponsor yields.
Through you, Mr. President. Who would the sponsor consider to be the prime author of these maps?
I don't know what Senator Lanza is referring to. I am the prime sponsor of this legislation, but as he well knows from experience, legislation is drafted by a number of people, from both houses of the legislature, staff involvement, et cetera. So prime author is not a term of art that I know exactly what he's referring to when he asked that question.
Would the sponsor continue to yield?
Will the sponsor yield?
Yes.
Through you, Mr. President.
The sponsor yields.
Why don't we do it this way? So this legislation is different than just about everything else we do. It comes around only once every 10 years. And it draws maps. It creates new districts across the state. It puts lines on the paper. It says, this is Senate District number 1 in Long Island. This is Senate District 43 in the North Country. Those lines need to be drawn. So I will ask again, through you, Mr. President, who put those lines on that paper?
A computer.
Would the sponsor continue to yield?
Does the sponsor yield?
Yes.
The sponsor yields.
Through you, Mr. President, where is that computer located?
No idea. You know, everything's now in the cloud, so, you know, I don't really know if there's an actual desktop somewhere. I don't have that level of detailed knowledge of where the work was done.
Will the sponsor continue to yield?
Will the sponsor yield?
Yes.
The sponsor
Through you,
yields.
Mr. President. So we're a few years away from computers actually having full artificial intelligence capabilities. And my understanding is that the computers we have today require that some human input information into those computers so that the computer spits out a result. So through you, Mr. President, could the sponsor tell us the person or persons who inputted that information?
No, I cannot.
Will the sponsor continue to yield?
Does the sponsor yield?
Yes.
The sponsor continues to yield.
Through you, Mr. President, does the sponsor mean to tell us, as the author of this legislation, that he has no idea who it was who entered the information that resulted in these maps?
Correct. That's what I'm saying, because this is a bicameral effort. There was multiple civil servants on both sides. I don't know who the tech person is that sits there and inputs the keys, so no, I do not know who did that.
Would the sponsor continue to yield?
Yes.
Will the sponsor yield? The sponsor yields.
Through you, Mr. President, can the sponsor tell us if he was ever present on any occasion when some human was entering information in a computer regarding these maps?
I was not.
Would the sponsor continue to yield?
Does the sponsor yield? The sponsor yields.
So let's take a look at the process, because many of us have not been privy to it, especially the millions of people in New York who are affected most by it. Through you, Mr. President, could the sponsor tell us where this map drawing occurred?
I'm going to give you the same answer. I don't know where the computer was. I don't know where it happened. The bottom line, Senator Lanza, and first of all, I appreciate that many of your colleagues were not privy to this process. It is a process that I believe you were privy to 10 years ago, and some of your colleagues were. So it is something you should be familiar with. But the bottom line is this. We're here to talk about a bill. The bill has all the details in it. It's before you. The maps are here. You can look at them. You can see where the lines are drawn. This is what I am putting forward as a sponsor. And so who tapped keys on a keyboard to make it happen is not particularly relevant to what we're talking about right now. So if you want to get to it, let's get to it.
We will. Would the sponsor continue to yield?
Will the sponsor yield?
Yes.
The sponsor yields.
Could the sponsor tell us whether or not he spoke to anyone during the process about any of these lines that were put on paper?
Certainly.
Would the sponsor yield?
Yes.
Will the sponsor yield? The sponsor yields.
Could the sponsor tell us who those people were?
No. No, these are, Senator Lanza, I mean, I could tell you that these are civil servants that do their jobs. They are staffers of LATFOR that have been there for, some people for decades, who participated in this process when you were doing it. And I don't particularly see the benefit of trying to expose government staffers to your interrogation right now. If you want to litigate, you can ask the questions you want, you can depose who you want, that the judge might or might not allow, and we'll get to that. But for today, we're here to vote on a piece of legislation. So let's discuss the legislation, ask questions, tell us what you don't like about it, and let's do our legislating.
The sponsor yield.
Will the sponsor yield?
Yes.
The sponsor continues to yield.
So I believe it is relevant. I think it is important that the people of the state of New York understand the process that resulted in new maps for Senate districts, Assembly districts, congressional districts
This map is not
being created. And in terms of interrogation, I'm not interrogating any civil servant or employee. But Mr. President, as Senator Gianaris knows full well, he and I have the enjoyable job, which requires from time to time that we interrogate each other. And so I will continue to do just that on behalf of the people of the state of New York. Through you, Mr. President, could the sponsor tell us if there were any out-of-state consultants who had input or who were involved in the drawing of these maps?
No. I mean, yes, I can tell you the answer is no.
Thank you. Would the sponsor yield?
Will the
Yes.
sponsor yield? Sponsor yields.
Could the sponsor tell us whether or not any sitting members of the legislature were consulted with before these maps were drawn?
Other than myself?
Yes.
I guess I would ask you to be a little more detailed in your question.
The sponsor would yield?
Will the sponsor yield?
Yes.
The sponsor continues to yield.
So, for example, can the sponsor tell us whether or not individual members of the Senate had input or were involved with the drawing of the lines for their district?
The short answer is no. We do talk to our colleagues all the time about a host of issues, but they were not involved in drawing the maps.
Sponsor yield.
Will the
Yes.
sponsor yield? The sponsor yields.
So the sponsor is right. I was here last time. I was not directly involved. I was not even remotely involved as a relatively new member. But I do recall, and I have seen even now, members scurrying in and scurrying out and about throughout the state, because as we both understand, these maps have grave implications for the people of New York, but they have individual implications for each member, even prospective candidates. And so I'm sure the sponsor would not deny that members have an interest in knowing what their district is going to look like. Members have an interest in requesting or guiding or controlling what their district looks like. Through you, Mr. President, I find it hard to believe. I find it highly implausible that not a single member of the New York State Senate spoke to either the sponsor or those civil servants or those employees or even that very intelligent computer about their Senate districts and their lines. Is that what the sponsor is saying?
No, it's not what the sponsor is saying, nor is it what the sponsor said. I said there were general conversations, but they were not the ones drawing the maps for their own lines, which is what your previous question was.
Would the sponsor yield?
Will the sponsor yield?
Yes.
Sponsor yields.
So to the sponsor's knowledge, not a single member of the Senate came to the sponsor, anyone associated with Lat 4, or for that matter, anyone else to say, could you draw this line here? And can you join that line there?
As I said, there were general conversations, but no members were actually drawing their own lines, which is what your previous question was.
Would the sponsor yield?
Will the sponsor yield?
And let me add, by the way, there were general conversations with members across the aisle. I think you and I spoke about your lines. So those kind of conversations happen all the time, casually, about what people think, but what I'm trying to convey to you is none of the members drew their own lines.
Would the sponsor yield?
Will the sponsor yield?
Yes.
The sponsor yields.
So let me just say that my good friend, I think, accidentally has mischaracterized any conversation we had, because I will say here and before the people of the state of New York, I never spoke to anyone about any line in my district. And I have never done this before, but I am going to do it now. Conversations between me and any member here has nothing to do with politics ever. But I will say, the only conversation I can think of that you're alluding to is that when these maps came out, you came to the floor and you said, hey, Lanza, don't worry, I think your map is pretty much the same. Because I, Mr. President, did not see my map until the rest of the world saw my district map. So let's be clear about that. And by the way, Mr. President, I am not casting any aspersion toward anyone or any member who has a concern about their district maps. It's natural, it's understandable, but I'd just like to know the who, the where, and the when, because I think the people of the state of New York deserve to know the who, the where, and the when, because the political landscape in terms of districts is about to change more than it has ever changed in at least recent memory. So I will continue. Would the sponsor continue to yield?
Yes.
Will the sponsor continue to yield? The sponsor yields.
So when you say that there were general conversations, could you explain to me how that worked? I mean, I'm just trying to think about how that might even happen.
Well, the reason I brought up what I did is because I was trying to make the point that general conversations are had amongst colleagues all the time, every day. And since we're doing this, that was not the extent of our conversation only. You made some comment about, oh, if I'd have gone to Brooklyn, it would have been this, that, and the other thing. There was a banter, if you will, but there was a conversation about your lines. I'm merely saying, you're asking all these pointed questions about who I talked to and when. Conversations like that happen with members, with colleagues, all the time. And so, yes, I've talked to a lot of people. I've talked to you. That's why I brought that up. But people were not drawing their own maps, which is fundamentally your question.
Sponsor yield.
Yes.
Through you, Mr. President. Yes, I agree. That was after the maps came out, and we, as we normally do, we have, I'd like to believe, a good, friendly relationship. I have an enormous amount of respect for my counterpart. We talked about the fact that that some Democratic member talked about writing lands into Brooklyn, and I said, I hope I do. I hope that happens. A lot of good people.
My point is simply, similarly,
Yeah.
other members may have said similar things to me. That's the context of this conversation.
Yeah, so through you, Mr. President. So I'm glad the sponsor is admitting that people have conversations, and that's what I'm trying to get at. Through you, Mr. President, can the sponsor tell us whether
Are
or
you
not...
asking the sponsor to yield, Senator Lanza?
Does the sponsor yield?
Does the sponsor yield?
I do.
The sponsor yields.
Through you, Mr. President. Could the sponsor tell us whether or not any member, let's stay with the Senate, Democrat or Republican, submitted to either you, the LATFOR employees, or that computer that we're going to get back to, anything about lines in their district?
Not to my knowledge. If they did, it would have been through the public hearing process.
Would the sponsor yield?
Will the sponsor yield?
Yes.
The sponsor yields.
Could the sponsor tell us whether or not he's aware of the existence of any emails or texts or other correspondences between any sitting member of the legislature and LATFOR concerning district lines?
I don't have that knowledge. Not that I'm aware of.
Would the sponsor yield?
Will the sponsor yield? The sponsor yields.
Could the sponsor tell us whether he knows who the Senate Republican appointee to LATFOR is?
Yes, I believe I do, Senator Lanza.
Will the sponsor yield? The sponsor yields.
It's great to have good counsel at your side. The fact of the matter is, through you, Mr. President, I bet Senator Gianaris did not know that.
Well, you asked me a question, I gave you an answer. Now you're saying I'm lying to you, so.
No,
what can I
oh, no,
tell you?
oh, absolutely, Mr. President, absolutely not. Absolutely not. So I'll ask a different question. Through you, Mr. President, did Senator Gianaris know that I was the appointee before this moment?
Yes, I did.
The sponsor yield.
Will the sponsor yield?
Yes.
The sponsor continues to yield.
Given that fact, could the sponsor tell us why I was never invited to any of these map drawing parties?
I'm not familiar with what parties Senator Lanza is referring to. He's generally a sociable guy, so if there was a party, we probably would have invited him.
Will the sponsor yield?
Will the sponsor yield?
Yes.
Sponsor yields.
Could the sponsor tell us why I was not invited to anything having to do with Lat 4 or map drawing?
Not really.
The sponsor yield?
Will the sponsor yield?
No.
The sponsor does
Sponsor
not
does not
yield.
yield?
Oh, I'm sorry, yes.
Oh, the sponsor yields. Sorry.
Just to be clear, I'm,
I was still answering the previous question again.
gotcha. Oh, so the no is, you don't know why I was not invited.
Correct.
Will the sponsor yield?
Will the sponsor yield?
Yes.
Sponsor yields.
As chairman of Lat 4,
Co-chair.
co-chair of Lat 4, could you not, Senator Gianaris, have invited me?
Perhaps it would have been within my ability to do that, but I chose not to. Again, I don't know what I'm inviting you to. There weren't any parties. You know, I don't know what it is you're asking about that you should have been invited to.
Will the sponsor yield?
Will the sponsor continue to yield?
Yes.
Sponsor yields.
I'll try to make it clear. So I don't think the sponsor is really telling us that there was this computer tucked in some basement of some building where they filmed Men in Black, which did everything autonomously without any human input, and that we all just sat around waiting for the cake to be baked, and that you were as surprised as anyone when you received the maps from that computer. I don't think that is what happened. In fact, I know that is not what happened.
And I never said that's what happened.
So, through you, Mr. President, the drawing of these districts occurred somewhere and involved someone and probably more than someone. I'm trying to get, on behalf of the people of the state of New York, a glimpse into that process,
I understand that, Senator Lanza.
because I've had none as member of Lat 4. The people of the state have had none. And I think it's time, before we vote on this piece of legislation, that we draw back the curtains and open the door and get an idea how this happened and the process. And I think it's perfectly appropriate for us to be talking about the process. So through you, Mr. President, besides 250 Broadway in New York City, which is where Lat 4 does most of its work, were any maps drawn in any other locations?
Once again, I don't know. But let me say this, because maybe we could cut through this if we stipulate to some things. Maps were drawn, a computer did not organically draw them, which I never said, but you seem to think and be under the impression that that's what might have happened. That's not what happened. There are civil servants who work for Lat 4 who do this work. They've been doing it for many, many years. You and your colleagues were not involved. We can stipulate to that, okay? If that's what you're trying to get at. You have maps before you that my name is on as the prime sponsor. I will take responsibility for what's on those pages. Ask me whatever you want about it. But I'm not going to sit here and let you start poking at civil servants and trying to identify people publicly for doing their jobs. You want to do that in litigation, you'll have the chance to try and do that, and a judge may or may not allow you to do that. But I'm not going to sit here listing public servants into this political game you're trying to play.
Would the sponsor yield?
Does the sponsor continue to yield? The sponsor yields.
So this is not a game. This is very serious. I'm not poking at anyone. Regardless of your title, senator, employee, civil servant, if it was your task to draw these maps And the people of the state of New York deserve to know how you did it. Through you, Mr. President, can the sponsor tell us how many meetings there were in drawing these lines?
No, I cannot.
Will the sponsor yield?
Will the
Yes.
sponsor yield? The sponsor yields.
And through you, Mr. President, the sponsor has already said that no out-of-state consultants were involved in this process. Could he tell us whether or not there were any in-state consultants who were not employees or civil servants or members of the legislature who had input or had an advisory position with respect to the drawing of these maps?
No, there were not.
Will the sponsor yield?
Will the sponsor yield? The sponsor continues to yield.
So it's clear the sponsor does know specifically some of the things that happened here.
Let me, if I could just, because you're characterizing my response, let me just step in to clarify. Yes, I would know if there was a contract with a consultant, so I can answer that question. I don't know which civil servants work at Lat 4 were typing things into a computer. Those are two different things.
Sponsor yield?
Yes.
Does the sponsor yield? The sponsor has agreed to yield.
That's understandable. I appreciate that. Mr. President, through you, can the sponsor tell us whether or not he made any decisions with respect to where any of these lines were drawn?
Because these things are vague in general. I had input into the lines, yes. But ultimately, let me also say that we have a strict set of criteria that exist, and that's what was driving the map making.
Will the sponsor yield?
Yes.
So let's get to that. So the strict set of data that drove this process, can you describe what that or those are?
Give me one moment. Laid out in the Constitution, but since you asked, whether such lines would result in the denial or abridgment of racial or language minority voting rights. Districts shall not be drawn to have the purpose of, nor shall they result in the denial or abridgment of such rights. Districts shall be drawn so that based on the totality of circumstances, racial or minority language groups do not have less opportunity to participate in the political process than other members of the electorate and elected representatives of their choice. To the extent practicable, districts shall contain as nearly as may be an equal number of inhabitants. For each district that deviates, the Commission shall provide explanation. Each district shall consist of contiguous territory. Each district shall be as compact in form as possible. Districts shall not be drawn to discourage competition or for the purpose of favoring or disfavoring incumbents or other political candidates or political parties. The Commission shall consider the maintenance of cores of existing districts, of pre-existing political subdivisions, including counties, cities, and towns, and of communities of interest. Towns or blocks which from their location may be included in either of two districts shall be so placed as to make said districts most nearly equal in number of inhabitants. The requirements that Senate districts do not divide counties or towns as well as block on border and town on border rules remains in effect.
Sponsor yield.
Does the
Yes.
sponsor continue to yield? The sponsor yields.
Through you, Mr. President. Thank you, Senator Gineris. So who made sure that all that happened?
The civil servants at Lat 4 who drew these maps. With input from me, if that's what you're looking for. Yes.
Sponsor yield.
Will the sponsor yield?
Yes.
The sponsor yields. Senator Lanza, as a courtesy,
And-
you are approaching your 30-minute debate limit, just as a courtesy.
Okay, thank you.
And I should say, Senator Lyons, I'm sorry to step in, but as it relates to the assembly portion of this bill, I don't speak for the assembly, so I'm just giving you our side of the equation here.
I understand, and I appreciate that. Through you, Mr. President, would the sponsor yield?
Will the sponsor yield?
Yes.
The sponsor yields.
Through you, Mr. President, Senator Gineris, it's been reported that, quote-unquote, an Hispanic district was drawn. Do you believe that to be true?
I don't know what that means, Senator Lanza. Could you be more specific in your question?
Through you, Mr. President, I'm just going by what your press secretary said.
Can you, I mean, I don't know what you're referring to, Senator Lanza.
Through you, Mr. President, it's being widely reported in the news that an Hispanic district was drafted. Is that true, and what does that mean?
The map contains many districts that have predominant Hispanic populations. And as I did yesterday, let me point out I'm using the term Hispanic because that's the term the census uses.
Yes, I understand that, and thank you for clarifying that. Will the sponsor yield?
Yes.
Is the sponsor aware of some opposition that is being raised by the Asian American community, especially in New York City, with respect to the feeling that their vote has been diluted by the maps drawn here?
Am I aware of that? I'm aware of it specifically as it relates to some concerns about the assembly lines.
Will the sponsor yield?
Will the sponsor?
Yes.
The sponsor yields.
With respect to these new lines, how many, with respect to these new lines, how many Republican members of the Senate now find themselves living in the same district?
I'm sorry, I was speaking to staff. Can you repeat that?
Yes, with respect to these new lines that are being proposed, how many sitting Republican members of the Senate will now find themselves living in the same district?
I'm not sure I know the answer to that offhand. I know I think there's been reports since the maps came out about a couple of such situations.
The sponsor yield.
Yes.
Senator Lanza, you have reached your 30-minute debate limit. The sponsor has agreed to yield. Let this be the final question.
So do you want me to?
Let Senator Lanza continue, but he is eating into his colleagues' time if they also intend to debate.
Well, then I will. Okay.
On consent. Continue, Senator Lanza.
Thank you, Mr. President. Would the sponsor yield?
Yes.
Sponsor yield?
Yes, I do.
Sponsor yields.
So I will help Senator Gianaris out. There are 4 members in the Senate who are Republicans who will now find themselves living in the same district. Could you tell us how that occurred?
Well, as Senator Lanza surely knows, the maps had to change. It's why redistricting is required. Populations shift. There seemed to be migration over the last decade to parts of downstate. That's one reason. Another reason is the Republican drawn maps that we're living with today had taken full advantage to manipulate the allowable population deviation. So currently, the difference between the most populated and least populated Senate districts is 9.3%. The legal limit is 10. We endeavored to fix that because we deemed that to be an abusive form of gerrymandering. And now the difference between the most and least populated districts are 1.6%. Now, I give you all that background data by way of explaining. The Republicans, your side of the aisle, had done that in order to increase artificially the number of seats in a certain part of the state and overpopulated other districts to decrease their representation. Now, we could have played that game and taken it in the other direction and kept the deviation to its maximum extent to benefit us for partisan reasons, but we did not do that. Our difference is 1.6%, which means that as close as possibly could be imagined, all the districts in the entire state have comparable population. In doing that, that also necessitated a shifting of the lines. And when the lines shift, people who reside in a certain area sometimes get inadvertently placed in the same districts. But these lines are not drawn to make sure everyone who's elected as a district to run in. They're drawn for the communities of the state.
Would the sponsor yield?
Does the sponsor continue to yield?
Yes.
The sponsor yields.
Through you, Mr. President, I agree with that. It's just funny, or perhaps not so funny, that magically or coincidentally, by complete happenstance, it occurred with Republican members of the New York State Senate. We're led to believe, Mr. President, that the author of these maps, the entity holding that pencil or pen, was like Lady Justice up there on the Great Seal of New York State, blind to the result, guided only by the constitutional parameters. But anyone looking at these maps, Mr. President, cannot deny, cannot with a straight face see that Lady Justice did a lot of peeking, and that there was a invisible or not so invisible hand really guiding the process. Because I believe in coincidences, but it's just a bit too much for me to accept that a blind process, guided only by these constitutional principles, somehow seemed to target Republican members of the Senate
Senator Lanza, are you on the bill or are you asking the sponsor to yield for a question?
and not.
Senator Lanza, are you on the bill or are you asking the sponsor to
I'm
yield for
asking
a
a
question?
question. I'm asking a question, and not Democrat members of the Senate. So my question, Mr. President, for the sponsor is, how could that have happened?
I'm informed, Senator Lanza, that there is a district where a Democrat incumbent was placed in a district with another incumbent senator as well. So it's not just the Republicans.
Would the sponsor yield?
Will the sponsor yield?
Yes.
The sponsor yields.
I am so glad the sponsor brought that up. Lady Justice seemed to have taken off her blindfold with respect to that district, too. Because, yes, there are two members who live in a Senate Democrat, a Democrat-leaning district. In fact, I think the sponsor is one of them. But surreptitiously, Lady Justice and that not-so-dumb computer created a brand-new district right next to that one, in which no sitting member of the Senate now resides.
Can you be specific? I don't know what you're referring to.
Yeah,
so it'd be helpful.
I will. So, through you, Mr. President, so the sponsor just mentioned that there is, in fact, a district in which two sitting members of the Democratic caucus reside.
That's not what I said.
Oh,
So there's a district where a Democratic member and another incumbent member were placed in the same district.
would the sponsor yield?
Will the sponsor yield?
Yes.
The sponsor yields.
We could talk about that one. So once again, you're alluding to a district in which a Democratic member of the Senate will now be sharing a district with a sitting Republican member of the Senate. And it just so happens, again, this computer, wish somebody could tell me where I could buy this computer. Happens to be the district that has the greatest shift in terms of where it was in registration and where it now is in registration. I think, if memory serves me, it goes from a R plus D, goes from a D4 to a D40. So for those listening, it means it went from a slightly Democratic seat to an overwhelmingly Democrat seat. So yes, there is a seat in which a Republican and a Democrat who are now in office are pitted against each other, but the computer was able to draw a district that Abraham Lincoln probably couldn't win.
So as if I may.
Yeah.
because I honestly have no idea what you're talking about. I don't know what the D plus minus whatever is in this district. I honestly don't know. But just because we've all running campaigns and are involved in politics, I seriously doubt it went from +4 to +40. That would just be like some kind of monumental shift that I don't know if I can imagine happening. Maybe it did, but if it did, I don't even know that it did. So that's fine. But let me say this as well about this district, because let's be clear about what happened. Okay, sometimes districts are going to get better, and sometimes districts are not going to get better, and the districts are going to change when you redraw the lines. But you're talking about a district, and just because we're speaking very generally, let's get to it. It's Amherst, I believe, is the town we're talking about, that you folks had twisted and convoluted to connect to the city of Rochester. Okay? Why? Because it was R plus whatever your chart says there. I don't even know what it was, right? And so putting a suburb of Buffalo with the city of Buffalo is why that happened. And for you, because I've heard this out in the world since these maps came out, for you to say that somehow our interest should be in making sure that current districts elect certain people continue to do that, that's partisan gerrymandering. I don't have those numbers you're looking at. Okay, you're looking at how much Democrats would get, how much Republicans get. I don't have that. I'm thinking about Amherst is next to Buffalo. They belong together. As opposed to, let me take Amherst, jump through all these other rural towns and get all the way out here so I could split Rochester 3 ways. Because when you guys drew these lines, they were all Republicans representing the city of Rochester. So it turns out we beat you under your own lines. We can talk about that another time. But that was egregious. You can't sit here and complain about the fact that we're keeping a city and its suburbs together when you would want to connect a Buffalo suburb to the city of Rochester, which you are only carving into to keep the other residents of Rochester from electing a representative of their choice.
Yield.
Yes.
The sponsor yield, the sponsor yield.
Through you, Mr. President, as I've stated a number of times, I didn't connect anything to anyone,
It must have been the computer you guys used.
and irrespective of what happened 10 years ago, 20 years ago, or 50 years ago, it is the legislation and the maps before us that are relevant.
You can try, Senator Lanza, and escape talking about what you guys did, but you cannot for the following reason. I'm not doing it just to be, petty. The changes you see that you're complaining about are the result of us fixing the horrible map drawing that you all did a decade ago. Maybe it wasn't you. Like I said, maybe you had your own supercomputer or whatever. I'm not going to sit here and ask you who drew your lines 10 years ago, Senator Lanza. Give me the name of the person, like you are. But the fact is, this map is a fix. And when you fix things that are broken, they're going to change. And you may not like that change, but that's what's happening. And that's why I'm going to keep bringing up what these lines looked like 10 years ago.
Would the sponsor yield?
Will the sponsor
Yes.
continue to yield?
Yes.
The sponsor yields.
I would agree this is a fix. I would agree it's fixed. And I would say the only thing it fixes,
I think if I can help you, the term of art for people on your side of the aisle is rigged. Isn't that what you guys say every time you don't like something that happens?
Mr. President, as always, I tend to agree with Senator Generis on many things. Yes, rigged. By the way, Mr. President, not by you, but by someone. Because I agree with what the sponsor was saying, Mr. President, about the fact that the maps should not be drawn to favor one party or one incumbent or some candidate. And so, in fact, Mr. President, I'm asking these questions not because I want that to happen, but because it has already happened.
It happened a decade ago.
It has already happened. It is happening right here in these
It
lines.
happened 10 years ago, it happened 20 years ago, it happened 30 years ago,
And
it
through you,
happened
Mr.
40 years
President-
ago, it happened 50 years ago.
And through you, Mr. President,
All by your side of the aisle. I could go
through you,
back
Mr.
further.
President, I'd like to think that I have some common sense. It is implausible, I'll say impossible, for me to accept that these maps were created without attention to helping one incumbent or another, or one party. That's my belief. Mr. President, through you, because I know a lot of people across the state of New York are going to see and are going to know the same thing. And so we could talk about 10 years ago, as long as the sponsor wants to. If the sponsor would like to bring that legislation back to the floor, I'd gladly vote aye. But we're talking about this legislation, because this is what the people of the state of New York are going to have to live with for the next 10 years. Mr. President, through you, would the sponsor yield?
Will the sponsor yield?
Yes.
Sponsor yields.
Senator Janeris, did LAT4, you, or the computer use election or enrollment data when drawing these districts?
I'm trying to get, your questions get very vague, which is why I'm pausing. Election registration data is available publicly. It's always been. I believe LAT4 posts them on their website so the public can have a look at them and, do their own analysis and know what's happening. And of course, we have to look at them in the sense of making sure that the maps are being done correctly. So yes, but they were not drawn for the purpose, let me get the words exactly right. They were not drawn for the purpose of favoring or disfavoring incumbents or particular candidates or political parties. And if I could just, I will, but if I could just clarify a little further, just so everyone understands what I'm talking about. There's a legal principle, it relates to the first criteria, but it also is a federal principle, where you cannot allow for the retrogression of minority voting power. In order to ensure that you're doing that, you have to look at election performance in those districts.
Would the sponsor yield?
Will the sponsor yield?
Yes.
The sponsor yields.
Through you, Mr. President, that reminds me, could the sponsor tell us how many districts contain over 50% of a specific minority?
It's how many districts have a majority of a particular
Yes.
minority population, right? Let me do the math here. Hold on one second. Seven. Seven with a majority. There are others with a plurality of minority representation.
Would the sponsor yield?
Will the sponsor yield?
Yes.
The sponsor yields.
Through you, Mr. President, thank you. Could the sponsor tell us whether or not these districts were drafted with those communities in mind?
But to the extent we're required to comply with the law I just referenced, then of course.
Would the sponsor yield?
Will the sponsor yield?
Yes.
The sponsor yields.
Does the sponsor know, and therefore could the sponsor tell us what the citizen voting age population is of those districts?
We got into this a little bit yesterday, Senator Lanza, with Senator O'Mara. The census has not provided us with final citizen voting age population data at this point, so I don't have that.
Would the sponsor yield?
Will the sponsor yield?
Yes.
The sponsor yields.
Through you, Mr. President. So a few moments ago, we talked about this computer and that data needed to be inputted. If that information was not available, what information and data was used?
The census data as it relates to population generally, and we do have, I'm told, the voting age population, but not the citizen voting age population.
Would the sponsor yield?
Will the sponsor yield?
Yes.
The sponsor yields.
So just to be clear, is the sponsor saying that so which information was available?
The voting age population. But I guess, from what I'm gathering, from what I'm being told, we don't know among that population which are citizens or not.
Would the sponsor yield?
Yes.
Will the sponsor yield? The sponsor yields.
Through you, Mr. President. So could the sponsor tell us then how you evaluated the VR districts without utilizing the data?
Well, we utilize the data I just referenced.
Would the sponsor yield?
Will the sponsor yield?
Yes.
Sponsor yields.
Could the sponsor tell us, would that data provide the same information? Yeah.
I mean, obviously not, or else it would be the same data. But this is what we have to go on. Most of the country has already finished their redistricting, so I assume they're using the same information that we have available to us. It's just not the CVAP data, not the citizen voting age population data.
Would the sponsor yield?
Will the sponsor continue to yield? Senator Janaris, do you yield?
Oh, yes, I yield. Mr.
Senator,
President.
the sponsor yields.
Would you like me to answer that? Yeah. My understanding is the citizen voting age population is not a criteria we're required to use for purpose of complying with federal laws. But the other data we're using provides enough information for us to comply with federal standards.
Yield?
Will the sponsor yield?
Yes.
Sponsor yields.
Would the sponsor tell us how recent or the latest confirmed data, year that we have that data for?
This is getting into the weeds here, but it's a good question. So we don't have the CVAP data current and final, as we discussed. What the census does is periodic surveys to update its data from a decade ago. The data, the most recent such survey was in 2020, except that data is widely viewed now as unreliable because it is accepted that it misestimated a lot of the numbers. And that was most evidently so in the fact that that data would have indicated we were going to lose 2 congressional seats in New York. That's why everyone had that expectation. But then when the actual census data came in, we only lost 1. So from what I understand, all experts recognize that the 2020 survey data is not a reliable barometer at this point.
Would the sponsor yield?
Yes.
Will the sponsor continue to yield? The sponsor yields.
Does the sponsor believe that if we waited for the newest data, that there would be a greater chance that the maps would be drawn according to the constitutional parameters?
No.
Would the sponsor yield?
Yes.
Will the sponsor yield? The sponsor continues to yield.
Is the sponsor saying that with the new data that ought to be used, nothing would change? Had the sponsor had it?
I expect nothing would change, yeah, but again, I'm told that the federal standards do not require or expect us to look at citizen data, only population data. And so the voting age population data, which we have, is sufficient.
Sponsor yield?
Yes.
Will the sponsor yield? The sponsor yields.
Through you, Mr. President, would the sponsor agree that if, for instance, in SD 51, if a district was drawn which combines 2 incumbent senators of the same party, and that it was drawn intentionally to accomplish that goal, that that would be unconstitutional?
I mean, these standards are brand new. and have not been interpreted. So I don't want to sit in the position of our judiciary and tell you exactly what would run afoul of them or not, but to the extent it was being done intentionally to, let me get the language right, intentionally to disfavor an incumbent, then that would seem to be violative of subdivision 5 of that provision.
Would the sponsor yield?
Will the sponsor yield?
Yes.
Sponsor yields.
Through you, Mr. President, and so the sponsor is claiming that that did not happen there.
It certainly did not happen.
Would the sponsor yield?
Yes.
The sponsor yields.
And would that, the sponsor agree that where it also occurred in SD4, in which 2 Republican members of the Senate now live in the same district, that again, that was just a happenstance of the data that was inputted into the computer and then resulting in lines spit out by the computer?
That's exactly what I'm saying.
Will the sponsor yield?
Will the sponsor yield?
Yes.
The sponsor yields.
So I don't know whether or not the sponsor is aware, but one of these districts that we're talking about, because the sponsor, when we discussed this issue a few minutes ago, talked about the fact that when you change districts dramatically, these sorts of things are going to happen. One of these districts, Mr. President, is substantially intact. And what I mean by that is very, 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 very little has changed between the old district and the new district. Let's say this is the district, except one little thing. Right over here lives a Republican member of the Senate. She's here now. And somehow the computer knew, and Lady Justice up there lifted her blindfold, and her house was snipped right out of the district, while the rest of the district is the same. Can the sponsor explain that?
I can, because the rest of our district is not the same. And that district was changed in order to unite communities of interest that were intentionally divided by you all 10 years ago. I know you don't want to hear it, but you want me to answer the question, I got to explain the context. So we were combining communities that you had divided intentionally, I would submit, and in doing so, the result you referenced occurred, but it was not intentional.
Mr. President, on the bill.
Senator Lanza on the bill.
Mr. President, first I want to thank Senator Gianaris. This is, to most people, it's boring. But the implications and the impact on the state of New York is not. It's far from it. This is as important a bill as you will ever vote on if you're a member of the legislature. And Mr. President, I believe the people of the state of New York deserve to know how these maps were drawn, who drew them, and why they ended up looking the way they do. You know, there's a term known as gerrymandering. I think it combines the name of a member of some legislature years ago with salamander, because somebody looked at some of the district lines and said it looks like a salamander. And some guy gerrymandered them, so we'll call it gerrymandering. Mr. President, the sponsor tells us that this legislation aims to fix that and to cure that. The people of the state of New York are going to get a look at these maps, And they're going to know, Mr. President, that that's not true. When you look at these maps, what you're going to see are a bunch of salamanders which have grown new legs and a longer tail. In fact, they look like octopus. And maybe that ought to be the new way we describe this one. We'll call it Jerrypuss. Because this map is the quintessential definition of improper gerrymandering written with one goal in mind: to grab more power for one party. When the goal of districting is to make sure that the people's voices are heard. You know, I hear a lot lately from the left about an attack on our democracy. I hear a lot on the left, from the left, about the disenfranchisement of voters. I hear a lot from the left about a so-called voting rights bill named after one of America's great legislators that's being considered in Congress now as being vitally important if we're going to fix so-called our democracy. Mr. President, this map violates that bill. If that bill were law, these maps would be thrown out. Period. And in fact, Mr. President, the entire impact of this legislation will do more to disenfranchise voters, will do more to marginalize voters, will do more to alienate certain minority communities, will do more to allow one party to grab more power than anything that's ever come before this floor. The world is watching, Mr. President, and the world knows exactly what's happening here. Quite frankly, Mr. President, I accept everything Senator Gianaris said with respect to what he knows and what he doesn't know. But we all know, Mr. President, that this map was not written by some neutral computer sitting in some basement somewhere. Impossible. We all know, Mr. President, that people, politicians, sat down and said, let's make this district look like that, because we'll get another Democrat. Let's draw this district this way, because we'll get rid of that Republican. There's no other way to explain this map, period. Now, Senator Gianaris and I like to discuss the past sometimes. He likes to tell tales about the past, 10 years ago and beyond. Why don't I just stipulate? Why don't I just stipulate that what's happened in the past, 10 years ago, 20 years ago, 30 years ago, 40 years ago, is not perfect. I'll go so far as to say I wouldn't have done it that way. But Senator Gianaris likes to talk about it, Mr. President, to muddy the waters of what is happening now, to blind the people to what is about to hit them. Let's just say somebody committed a wrong 10 or 20 or 30 years ago. I don't understand the logic in terms of what that means today. Does that mean if somebody robbed a bank 20 years ago, that we're going to rob a bank today? Is this about petty, you got me, now I got you? Because it's not supposed to be. This bill needs to stand on its own. We're here to judge this bill the way it is. The people of the state of New York are going to have to live with these maps. And I can tell you this, Mr. President, people of the state of New York have had it. They have had it. As I travel the state, I see despair, frustration. People feel that too much is wrong and not enough is right. But really, they despair because they feel they don't have a voice and they don't have a say, and that their liberty has been limited, and their freedom has been infringed, and that it seems more and more every day that government has more power than they do, and that's not the American way. Thomas Jefferson knew that it's a zero-sum game. Every drop of power the government takes comes out of the well of liberty that belongs to the people. And this is the greatest power grab that I've seen in a long time. And every drop of power that the Democrats are gobbling for themselves comes at the expense of the freedom of the people. And that's why they despair. And that's why they are tired. And that's why they are frustrated. When they see this, they say, this whole thing is rigged against us. We have no voice. These politicians, all they care about is their own power. And they'll shred our rights to grab another ounce of it. You know, Mr. President, I'm going to be voting no when the time comes. As if that was any surprise. But what's happening here is wrong. Listen, I understand. We talked about conversations between me and Majority Floor Leader. We both love our state. We both love our country. We talk about the process often, what's wrong with it, what's right with it. The sponsor wants to talk about what happened 10 years ago. There's a big difference. First of all, the Constitution didn't include an independent redistricting commission. Second of all, Democrats did not control every branch of government in the state of New York. I will admit, in this chamber, Mr. President, that politics is a competitive, bare knuckles endeavor. And so, of course, people understand that if you give the pen to the Republicans, they're probably going to try to write Republican districts. Let's admit the big elephant in the room here. If you give the pen to the Democrats, they're probably going to write districts for Democrats. I know when you say that, politicians run around with their fingers in their ears and say, impossible. That doesn't happen. I would never do it. I don't know what you're talking about. It's a computer. It's a computer. Blame her. Blame him. Civil servants, they're good people. They did it. I don't know what you're talking about. Everybody knows what I'm talking about. Everybody knows what I'm talking about. And so the only way the system works, in the absence of what we tried to do in the state, the Independent Redistricting Commission, which was to take the politics out of it, didn't work. The only way that you get close to it is when you have both sides at it. When you have the Republicans at the table and the Democrats at the table. Republicans, yes, Mr. President, trying to get more Republican districts. Yes, Mr. President, Democrats trying to draw more Democratic districts. But faced off, fighting, opposing, arguing, and ultimately having to compromise. That's the way our founders intended the system to work. Compromise on behalf of the people so that you come as close to perfect, as close to good as possible. That's not what happened here, Mr. President. You cannot compare today to 10 years ago. Today, one party had the pen. One party, and that's dangerous. Anytime one party has the pen, the people suffer. Because human nature kicks in, and politicians think of themselves, they forget why they came here, the competitive juices flow, and they say, let's beat them. Meaning, let's beat the other party. And to heck with how that affects the people. And that's what happened here, Mr. President. One party, one pen. You heard it here, Mr. President, on the floor. Republicans were not even invited to, yes, the map drawing party. They weren't. For the party that claims to care about minority voices, for the party that claims to care about inclusion, for the party that claims to care about the voters and the people, this process proved that at the end of the day, too many politicians care only about themselves, their own power, their own party, and not the people. And the people are going to see this map. And there's no way around that. That is what happened. And so it breaks my heart, Mr. President, that the other party not only can't do a damn thing about it, the other party is not even invited, not even counseled, not even considered when doing something as important as this. Why not ask for input? No one said you had to use it. But right from the get-go, it was clear. Independent Redistricting Commission, Mr. President, everyone knew where that was going. I'd love to find out one day whether or not someone told those people what they ought to do. Because if they did, you're talking big time, Mr. President. We knew all along. I didn't ask Senator Gianaris, Mr. President, but I could tell you I wonder aloud, as well as so many others do, when were these maps really drawn? Were they drawn Saturday? Were they drawn last week, last month, last year? People deserve to know, Mr. President. People deserve to know. I know I'm not going to buy that these were drawn by some computer. I know the people ain't going to buy it. You know, there's a famous case in the U.S. Supreme Court concerning pornography, and the justice famously said, I can't really describe it to you, Mr. President, but I know it when I see it. Gerrymandering, improper gerrymandering, it's kind of the same in that hard to define, but you know it when you see it. Just look at this map, Mr. President, and you will see it. And let's remember that gerrymandering is just not some funny expression that we talk about. It means that the voters were screwed. That's what gerrymandering means. It means the voters were used as pawns to serve one party. I will end with this, Mr. President. I believe, as Judge Learned Hand once said, in the ultimate supremacy of reason. In our country, which was so brilliantly devised in terms of its constitution and its form of government, we have the legislature, we have the executive, and we have the judiciary, Mr. President. and throughout my lifetime, the courts were the last refuge for justice. And I'm hoping, Mr. President, that they will remain as such, because I believe that at some point the court will get to see the same map that I am looking at here. Mr. President, I thank you.
Senator Borrello, why do you rise?
Thank you, Mr. President. Will the sponsor yield for a question?
Will the sponsor yield for some questions?
Yes, I will.
The sponsor yields.
Yes, thank you, Senator Gianaris. So in this debate with Senator Lanza, you, I think, quoted from the constitutional amendment that the people of New York asked for and voted for, that this process has to include communities of interest. Can you please define communities of interest?
I think it's a very general term. Some communities of interest have been recognized as such by case law, but in general, it is communities that share common aspects of their life, common languages, and are generally defined in a way that they identify with each other.
President, will the sponsor continue to yield?
Will the sponsor yield?
Yes.
Sponsor continues to yield.
So with that in mind, I can tell you that I looked at several districts, and it seems like a lot of what was drawn, the only common interest was there's a lot of registered Democrats, more than Republicans. That just seems to be the most common interest. So with that said, whoever it was, bureaucrats, computers, how would they have had a clear definition of communities of interest in order to draw these maps so quickly, I might add?
Well, Senator Borrello, there were thousands of submissions over many months of public hearings that the commission had that were available to us and that LAT4 consulted when the lines were drawn, and many of them made arguments as to why their district should look a certain way.
President, will the sponsor continue to yield?
Will the sponsor yield?
Yes.
The sponsor yields.
Your press secretary stated that you drew 2 new districts in the New York City area, one for the Asian community and one for the Hispanic community. Were those districts drafted only with those communities in mind?
I think, and I don't know what quote you're referring to, so I can't really address it specifically. I don't doubt that you're referring to something that actually occurred. I just don't know what was said. But those districts were drawn to recognize growing populations over the last decade. And yes, communities that, if I may quote the Constitution again, and this is the first in the list, recognizing that racial and minority language groups do not have less opportunity to participate in the political process than other members of the electorate. And that was how we were looking at those communities particularly.
Thank you. Mr. President, will the sponsor continue to yield?
Will the sponsor yield?
Yes.
The sponsor continues to yield.
So you brought up growing populations, which is an interesting question for me. The county of Erie their population had grown, yet you have taken one of the Senate seats out of Erie County, assuming to move to New York City, obviously. So if the county of Erie's population grew, why did you have to move a seat out? In fact, how do you justify removing a seat from the Western New York delegation?
I continue to be startled that my colleagues want to focus on this part of the map, because the argument you're making is that we should continue to divide communities that identify with each other in order to have more senators from that region. And so what you're basically arguing is continue to take a piece of the Buffalo region and attach it to the city of Rochester. That's why you have so many people representing Erie right now. We would prefer to unite those communities as much as feasible, and that's what we've done.
Mr. President, will the sponsor continue to yield?
Will the sponsor yield?
So we're going to
The
unite
sponsor yields.
communities by giving them less representatives. I'm not sure how that unites communities. But with that being said, I still go back to my question. It's based on population. It's based on population, and Erie County grew. So I still don't understand how you justify, essentially, taking away representation for roughly, 300,000 people. So,
Senator Borrello, we did not take away, everyone's going to have a senator. And as I mentioned before, what we are doing is repairing a broken map that, you weren't here back then, Senator Borrello, but a broken map that you all broke. Okay? So the reason Amherst is connected to Rochester is to elect a Republican. It's the exact thing you pretend like you're opposed to right now. And your argument is, let's leave it that way because that's the way it is. So you're saying, we built in a Republican advantage into this district by grossly gerrymandering and separating people who identify with each other and live near each other to elect a Republican. And now we don't want you to change it because that would be bad for us. Well, I'm sorry. You know, that's not how it works. Communities that belong together belong together. When you guys divide cities and you divide towns from their neighboring cities in order to achieve a political goal, that's going to be fixed. And our map, to address something Senator Lanza said earlier, just to the eyeball, is so much cleaner and compacter and contiguous than the one we're living under today. So if you want to have that debate, I'll have it all day long.
Sponsor, continue to yield.
Will the sponsor yield?
Yes.
Sponsor yields.
So you said we, and again, I wasn't here, you're absolutely right about that, we divided cities. So is the city of Buffalo going to be represented by one senator? There's only 250,000 people, so is the city of Buffalo divided?
Because one of the criteria, as I mentioned when I outlined them all earlier, is to maintain the cores of existing districts. And Buffalo is split pretty cleanly between, I believe the west side is in one district and East Buffalo and South Buffalo in another, if I remember correctly. And we're maintaining that, that situation. The other thing I would mention is, as we try and allot population to certain districts, we have this town on border rule, which we tried to fix in the referendum, so it didn't. So this is, you know, what you're asking about is something that existed that we tried to repair, that you opposed. But the only place, we're not allowed to divide towns if we can help it. And so the only place that we can go to equalize the population among the districts is to go into the cities and peel population off of it.
Will the sponsor yield?
Yeah.
So you're saying,
Sponsor yields.
so you said bad Republicans split the city, now you're saying, but to the best of your ability, you also had to split the city.
To unite the cities, but we weren't able to do it because of this rule, which is why you have a more united city, from 3 to 2.
Mr. President, will the sponsor continue to yield?
Will the sponsor yield?
Yes.
The sponsor yields.
So 10 years ago, I wasn't here. As I recall, though, 'cause I was pretty involved in politics, were both the Republicans in charge of both houses?
The division,
No, that was my question. Thank you. Mr. President, will the sponsor
you
continue
can
to
answer
yield?
any way I choose,
Senator
Senator
Gianaris
Rowlands.
has the
Okay, all right,
floor.
go ahead.
The division, you know, you've been here a couple of years now, Senator Borrello. We haven't all been here because of the COVID rules, so, which you're flouting today, I should add, but that's okay. The way this Capitol has historically worked is it's not so much Democrat versus Republican as it is majority versus minority. And I have the fortune or misfortune of having been here long enough to have witnessed this. The Assembly majority and the Senate majority were making deals left and right all the time. And nobody cared about the Assembly Republicans or the Senate Democrats back then. Probably most notably when we had Governor Cuomo who was actively working against us. So don't assume that party registrations mean anything around here. But the point is those maps were drawn to benefit the Senate Republicans and to benefit the Assembly Democrats. And that's how it happened.
Continue to yield.
Yes.
Okay, so I guess my point is that, as I recall, they couldn't come to an agreement. And as I recall, their courts had drawn some lines. I know it was so in the congressional side of things. But if you're claiming that the Republicans controlled the process, how could we have controlled the process? How could every single member in both houses have voted for exclusively Republican maps when we did not have majorities in both houses?
I think I just answered the question. I mean, yes, you were right as it relates to Congress, that went to the courts, but the Senate lines were drawn by the Senate Republicans, and the Assembly agreed to accept their lines, and vice versa. So that's how it happened.
Mr. President, on the bill.
Senator Borrello on the bill.
Thank you. Senator Gianaris, thanks again. So I am pretty new here. I wasn't here 10 years ago. But I do know one thing. I know the people of New York State said, we don't want any more gerrymandering. We don't want any more deals between the Senate Democrat, the Assembly Democrats and the Senate Republicans. We don't want a process that's done behind closed doors. We want the people to be involved. I don't know where the people were involved here. But I do know that the Democrats control the Assembly, the Senate, and the executive chamber. That was not the case 10 years ago. So when we bring up these arguments, what I hear is, well, that's what the Republicans did. Well, first of all, not this Republican. I wasn't here. In fact, most of my colleagues weren't involved in this process. But regardless, the people of New York State said, we don't want this anymore. And here we are, doing the same thing again. What's the definition of insanity? So, folks, I can tell you that I think people in my district are far more attuned to this than I really thought they would be. This is kind of a down in the weeds thing. But they're upset. They're upset because when they go to the gas pump, the price is higher. They're upset when they go to the grocery store, they can't find food to put on their table. They're upset because they turn on the TV and they see cities like Rochester with a higher murder rate per capita than the city of Chicago, the murder capital of the world. And they want to at least feel like their government's working for them. And they're not talking about special interest after special interest, dividing the people, keeping us angry with each other. And they ask that we have a bipartisan process to draw districts for communities of interest, which we can't even define. But the people could have told us what their communities of interest were. They could have said, this is why we want to stay together. When I look at that ridiculous 63rd district, I lived in Amherst. I started my business in the city of Buffalo. There's no business for that district to be where it is. This is not the process that people wanted. And for the Democrats to say, well, that's what the Republicans did. Well, I don't know about your grandmother, but my grandmother says, 2 wrongs don't make a right. So let's set that aside. If you folks are the people, the party of the people, then do what the people asked. This isn't it. It's ridiculous. We had a chance to do it right. We had a chance to do what the people said in 2014, and they said it again just a couple months ago. And what are we doing? The same old thing. Why? Because that's what the Republicans did. None of these Republicans did it. So I'm no, and I think everybody else should be no. Thank you, Mr. President.
Senator Rackstraw, why do you rise?
Mr. President, on the bill.
Senator Rackstraw on the bill.
Thank you, Mr. President. I rise this morning on behalf of not only the people that I represent in Senate District 52, but on behalf of all New Yorkers, regardless of their politics, regardless of their political persuasion, regardless of where they're from. You know, they say that absolute power corrupts absolutely. It was true in 1857 when the phrase was coined, and that statement has never been more true than it is today. Ask yourself a question. What is the role and responsibility of an elected official? For me, it's simple. It's your job to execute the will of the people. We work for the people, not the other way around. The sad reality is that there are some in this room that are so self-absorbed, so drunk on power, that they will blatantly circumvent the will of the people for their own gain. It's not as though it's happened once, twice, it's happened 3 times. Just a very brief history lesson. 2014, the people of this great state spoke very clearly. They said, we want an independent commission to redraw the line. The bill that allowed that to happen passed in a bipartisan way. There are Democrats that still sit in this room that thought it was a good idea. The now mayor of New York City thought it was a good idea. Members of Congress thought it was a good idea. Fast forward, 2018, new majority. They say, you know what? Let's take one more crack at this. Let's see if we can change the will of the people. Ballot proposition number 1, repeal what the voters said in 2014. What did the people say? They said, no, I don't want the legislature involved in this process. I want it to be an independent process, and the result of that being an independent map. So here we are today, for a 3rd time, discussing the very same issue. But today is much different. Today we're doing it in a very public way, and there are members of the majority that are saying we're going to deliberately silence the voice of the people. We're going to deliberately silence the will of the people. The reality, my friends, is that they can't win arguments or debates based on merit or fact. So by way of these maps, what they're doing is structuring the system of government that gives them, the elected official, all of the power at the expense of the very people that they're supposed to be representing. Now, one would think that what I described is a bad movie or a book. And I say to all my friends across this great state that, in fact, it's not. It's your government. It's your state government working for you this way. Sadly, on full display, as you've seen during the debate, is blatant arrogance. So much arrogance, it drips from the gold ceiling in this room. You see shamelessness, you see callousness, cunningness, and what I call it is political calculus employed by the so-called leaders of this great state. Senator Borrello talked about communities of interest. For decades, Broome and Tioga counties, two counties that I represent, have always been represented by the same member of the state Senate. That no longer will be the case. You know why? Because of political gerrymandering. That's why. So for the majority, they have no issue attempting to silence the voice of those in the minority or silence people who live in upstate New York. Mr. President, quite frankly, it's why I rise today, to honor my commitment to the people that I represent and to honor my commitment to the people of all the people of this state. To come here to Albany, to speak up and to be their voice and to speak truth. A yes vote, very simply, is a message to the people. I do not care what you think. I do not care what you say. What I care about is my own political longevity. And as I stand here and speak about this bill, I am more resolute in my belief that I work for the people. My job is to represent their needs. My job is to represent their desires. So today, as I always have, and like my colleagues who sit in their desks exactly where they belong, doing the people's work, I remain, just like my colleagues, a principled leader, an elected official who understands who he works for. I choose, like my colleagues on this side of the aisle, to put people before politics. I'm here 6 years in Albany. This is the most shameful, undemocratic, un-American piece of legislation that this House has ever taken up. Mr. President, I vote no.
Senator Rath, why do you rise?
On the bill, Mr. President.
Senator Rath, on the bill.
Mr. President, I rise to describe a broken, fractured, and wickedly partisan process. These Democrat-drawn Senate and Assembly maps are now fully revealed. And with that, one thing is infinitely clear to everyone in this room. The will of the people has been ignored. In 2014, the voters of New York resoundingly supported a constitutional amendment, and that amendment created the Independent Redistricting Commission. This amendment made it abundantly clear that New Yorkers wanted legislative lines drawn in a fair and a nonpartisan manner. This past November, the voters spoke again, furthering their support of an independent process for redistricting. Twice in 7 years. Yes, that's twice in 7 years. Surely the voice of the voters was heard. Or was it? I wonder if my colleagues on the other side of the aisle are having short-term and long-term memory issues. 3 months is not a long time, folks. 3 months is a blink of an eye in this business. Both of these referenda were completely ignored, sidestepped, and bypassed by the Democrats in this legislature. Now we are seeing the results. Communities that have been bound together for years are ripped apart. Communities that have been bound together for years are separated. Some of these communities have been together for 6 decades. That's a long time. Imagine that. 6 decades together, now ripped apart. To me, that is the voters of certain areas of New York State being disenfranchised, no longer represented together. Make no mistake, this is the least transparent redistricting process New York State has ever seen. What was once the great Empire State now has been reduced. It has been reduced to a state of redistricting funk. A state of redistricting funk. Plain and simple. Too many communities in Western New York and across our state are losing their voice. And in return for what? Here's what's happening. New York City is gaining 2 new Senate seats to further its partisan agenda. That is just wrong. It's proposals like this, which we are seeing from this majority, that is a reason why the people across our great state no longer trust their government. The trust is lost, and that is shameful. What else are we seeing? Here's what we're seeing. Nearly 1,000 residents per day are leaving our great state. This might not seem like much to New York City, but this means the world to upstate. 1,000 people a day. This is not good government. This is not positive leadership. It's failed leadership. And what this represents is more hyper-partisan politics, as usual, out of Albany. There has not been one public hearing on these maps. There has not been any public input on these maps. This is shameful, and this is unacceptable, as voter equity is now lost on the residents of Western New York. I'm going to close in echoing the comments of my good friend, Senator Akshar. An argument can be made that this is a move to cement absolute power. Absolute power for one side of the aisle in Albany. I deeply hope that this body never forgets that absolute power corrupts. Absolutely. For these reasons, when the time is right, Mr. President, I will be strongly and resolutely in the negative.
Senator Steck, why do you rise?
Thank you, Mr. President. On the bill,
Senator Steck on the bill.
I've been listening to the dialogue and the debate today, and a few things jumped off the page of me that I thought warranted bringing a little more attention to. On the first debate, I think the point was being made that of our 20 members, 5 of our members, I think it could be fairly said, fared extremely poorly in the maps that came from a computer with no human input, just randomly generated by blind Lady Justice. 5 of 20 Republican members of this House got a very unkind turn in this map. But what was not brought out, or it wasn't clear anyways, is that 3 people on the other side of the aisle, 3 of 43, had a similar, complicated outcome, most of which will be resolved. Those 3 will be fine. So again, a blind process with a computer that saw no human input, no one knows where the computer was or who worked on it. 25% of Republicans had an issue with the map, and at best, 7% of Democrats in this chamber had it. And part of the justification when we started pulling these threads about asking why were things done this way, very predictable, I suppose on many levels understandable, but the justification, make no doubt, was exactly this. You did this to us when you were in the majority 10 years ago, and 20 years ago, and 30 years ago. Well, first of all, the vast majority of us, including myself, have never participated in this. So we'll pay for those sins, I guess. Somebody wants to take it out on members that had nothing to do with this, but I understand that. But I also understand that my teenage son, when he was much younger, he learned this lesson. 2 wrongs don't make a right. And I think most New Yorkers, I think most intelligent people would agree that 2 wrongs don't make a right. But that's what we're doing today. However, I want to make sure that this point is very clear to the public, and it should not need emphasis to this body. But there's a couple things that are very different today than 10 years ago and 20 years ago and 30 years ago. And that is in 2014, after 2 different legislatures passed a constitutional amendment and went to the voters of the state of New York to create an independent redistricting commission. This is the first time that we have gone through this process with that part of our Constitution, the state's Constitution, amended to require an independent redistricting process. It was reaffirmed last fall through the proposition process. The voters of the state of New York said they wanted this to not be a partisan process, and yet here we are today looking at what was a very, very partisan process. And the other point that I think is worth mentioning when people say, well, you did this to us 10 years ago, is that 10 years ago, we had divided legislature. We had one party in the majority in one house, and the other party, they were forced to work with each other. They were forced to compromise. They're forced to be fair to each other. And I'll circle back to my initial, that 5 of 20, and a few of those irreconcilably damaged by this process, whereas 3 of 43 are mildly inconvenienced by this process. No one in the state of New York that looks at these facts is going to say that this was done fairly or blindly or by a computer with no human input. With that, I will be voting in the negative.
Are there any other senators wishing to be heard? Seeing and hearing none.
What you're asking is who wants to speak on the bill as opposed to explaining the vote, which we're about to get into right now. So.
Yes, my understanding was that you individuals would be explaining your vote. Is anybody else on the bill? Please, next time, Senator Disco, please notify your floor leader.
No, let him
Senator Disco on the bill.
Thank you, Mr. President. Holistically, let me start out by saying I heard Senator Gianaris say that this redistricting changes the process of gerrymandering, and I totally agree. It heightens the process of gerrymandering. It does change it to that extent. And for my colleagues, I think you know this. Something happens when you tell a lie. You have to tell another lie to cover it up. Then after you do that, you have to tell another lie to cover up the lie you told to cover up the initial lie. And it goes on and on and on. The most egregious individuals I can think of, and I think your constituents think of that too, is people who take an oath of office. People who ask them to let them represent them. Those are elected officials. Because you take an oath of office not only to adhere to the New York Constitution, but the United States Constitution, to listen to them, to be their representative, and basically to be honest and straightforward. This is the antithesis of what a representative democracy and a representative government is. Now, 10 years ago, which you've been talking about, there was certainly gerrymandering. And there was gerrymandering 10 years before that, and there was gerrymandering 10 years before that. And most of you who are in the majority now were in the minority, like I was in the minority in the New York State Assembly. And we kept talking about we got to change the system for an independent, outside commission. And the do-good groups across the state, the League of Women Voters, all those individuals. The media wanted to have that happen. And you know what? The media wants to have it happen again. That's the fourth estate. That's what you talk about. And there's some conservative media, there's some progressive media. But you can look across the state in the nation today, and they're talking about New York State. I just picked out one today. This is the Washington Post, their opinion piece. New York's Democratic gerrymandering is egregious. The courts must intervene. Let me read that. It's not me, it's not my colleagues. It's not even today what you're hearing from the Republicans and Democrats across New York State. And I'll tell you why it's both parties. It's a media outlet. It's the Times-Union. It's the Gazette here in the Capital Region. 90% of them, the fourth estate, says you are gerrymandering to the highest levels. Not us. And they're the watchdogs. You always rely on them quite a bit. I've been in this room and I've heard you quote the media and all the facts they brought forth. So now you're refuting what our friends from the fourth estate have been saying. After that last 10 years where there was gerrymandering, we came together at some point before we got to this point 10 years later where we're going to go through the same process of redistricting. And we came together and said enough is enough, partially because of all those do-good groups in the public, Republicans and Democrats, a good majority of the 19.5 million people. Let's do it the fair way. Let's have parity. Let's try to take as much politics out of it. Let's think about the people we represent. And you know what? Minorities and majorities, Republicans and Democrats, progressives and conservatives said we'll do it. By a large majority of all of us, we said, let's let the chips fall where we may this time. Something else happened along the way. My colleagues on the other side of the aisle became the majority in this House. More than that, we had one collectively, holistically voice from one affiliation, from one region of the state. You control all levers of power, period. You control all levers of power. You had the ability to adhere to that independent outside commission that you said you supported when you were in the minority. I was in the majority for 2 of the years that I've been here. I've been through several redistrictings. I never was in the majority, but I always was opposed to gerrymandering, disenfranchising the public. Especially this one does for upstate New York. And anybody who represents any part of upstate New York, if you're voting for this, you're telling us you don't make a difference. My oath of office doesn't make a difference. You told me, and this is the other part of it, after we voted for it, we went to the public and said, you want this? And they ceremoniously said they did. And the reason why I say Republicans and Democrats, because we can't vote for anything and win in New York State unless Democrats vote for it. We can't stop something from happening in the ballot box collectively from New York State unless there's some Democrats by a good number who vote for it. Democrats and Republicans clearly voted for an independent outside commission because that's what we had going here. But then you said something else, and this is the big lie. This is what's so egregious. It's not only egregious, it's evil and it's treacherous. And our founding fathers are rolling over in their grave knowing that we're at this point once again at the highest level to disenfranchise our citizenry. You said, we got the power, and this is what scares me so much, my colleagues. Do you know how many countries have nuclear weapons? What this says that people who have the power to do something, most of the time eventually do it. That should scare the hell out of us right now. Because if you can do this, the nuclear option, I'm not satisfied with 2/3 of the control, 43. I want it all. I don't care what I said in that oath of office. I raised my hair, had my family hair, put my left hand on the Bible. I want it all. And it's sad that you got nothing on Pinocchio. I mean, geez, lie after lie after lie, and they get bigger, and that's what you have to do when you lie. So finally you said, I have the power. Why did I not just change my mind? Proposition 1, let's really water it down. If we really water it down, it'll even be more easier to get it in our hands. And who cares what those special do-good groups say, or my public say, or the people I represent say? Well, they sent a message to you. Again, Democrats as well as Republicans. It failed statewide. I don't know, is there 9.5 to 9 million, 9.5 million people in New York City? They didn't even care if you were going to bring more power to them. They said this is wrong, because it wouldn't have passed statewide unless you had a heck of a lot of Democrats voting for it. Real Democrats who care about an oath of office, who care about representative democracy. Because, you know, Republicans and Democrats both really do. And they both say, I'm sure they have a philosophy that they support, but they also believe in a representative democracy. You had the ability to do it, and you took the nuclear option. Now, I've been through several redistrictings, as I said, and yeah, they tried to beat me out. But you know what I did? I did the one thing you didn't do here. I just walked into the district and told them the truth. I told them who I was. I told them what I stood for. I told them what I'll fight for. I told them I'll always represent them. I'll never walk into here and say, hey, what do I want to do and my family want me to do? Because my family, when I take an oath of office, is the people I asked to let me represent them. The greatest honor you could ever have is to be a representative. City Council, I was on there. State Assembly, I was in there. Now I'm in this grand building room, the most beautiful room, I think, picked across this nation as a Senate and a legislative room and office. And you know what they did? They elected me overwhelmingly. And you know why we're all going to come back next time? Even though you turned our lives, our families' lives, and the world upside down, you matched us up together, you did the big lie. You did the big lie. You're going to need a bigger mask. We're going to win. We're going to win for one reason. We're going to tell the truth. Thank you, Mr. President.
Are there any other senators wishing to be heard? Seeing and hearing none, debate is closed. Secretary will ring the bell. There is a substitution at the desk. The Secretary will read.
Senator Gianaris moves to discharge from the Committee on Rules Assembly Bill number 9040A and substitute it for the identical Senate Bill 8185A, third reading calendar 421.
Read the last section. I apologize. Substitution so ordered. The Secretary will read.
Calendar number 421, Assembly number 9040A by Assembly Members Zabrowski, an act to amend the state law.
Read the last section.
Section 4, this act shall take effect on the same date and in the same manner as the chapter of the laws of 2022.
Call the roll.
Addabbo, Gianaris, Kruger, Ort, Stewart, Cousins, White.
As a courtesy to the House, might I remind the House of the rules, or as it were, the law and order governing debate. Relating to Rule 9, subsection 3E, the sponsor is not to exceed 5 minutes, and members may not speak to exceed 2 minutes in explanation of his or her vote. Senator Gianaris.
Thank you, Mr. President. Let me just at the outset clarify that we've consented to let the leader speak for 5 minutes as well on his explanation. So I just want to set the record straight about a bunch of things that were just said, and I'll do it within 5 minutes, hopefully. We've heard a number of members say, you know, we were wrong 10 years ago, meaning you, and you know, that doesn't make it right to do the same thing back. Two wrongs don't make a right. I heard that phrase a number of times. Nobody is saying two wrongs make a right. Nobody is saying, since you did it to us for decades, we're now going to, you know, pull out the hammer just for punitive purposes. That is not at all what is happening here. I made this point earlier in the debate, but what is happening is repairing the damage done by that work 10 years ago, and 20 years ago, and 30 years ago, and so on. You can't sit here and say, we were wrong, but leave the maps as they are right now, because that just enshrines that bad behavior into the maps forever. If we're going to fix the things that you did that were wrong, we have to fix them. If we're going to fix them, things are going to change. And that's what's happening. And I want to give just a few examples, because one of the, aside from the population deviation question, which we already discussed, a tool known as cracking is something that was used routinely by the Republican majority in redistricting. Cracking is when you take a community that belongs together and you chop it up into pieces so that they can't elect somebody of their choice. And we did a lot of repair work, and that's caused a lot of the things that you seem to be unhappy about. Some of the places, just some of the places around the state that were cracked that are now together: Huntington, Baldwin, Elmont, Wyandanch, City of New Rochelle, City of White Plains just about. The City of Rochester used to be split 3 ways, now is split 2 ways. The County of Monroe was split 6 ways, now is split 3 ways only. The County of Ulster is all together. You guys had split it up 4 different ways. County of Tompkins was split 3 ways, now it's in 1. And I should mention, as it relates to Tompkins, because it was brought up, the commission proposals, both from the Democratic and Republican commissioners, had proposed a solution similar to what we did, which combines those counties. And so what I'm hearing a lot in these arguments is an argument for incumbent protection. You're not arguing about the communities and what they need and what they deserve and what they care about. You're worried about what you might have to do, what your families might have to do. Oh no, we're in the same district with somebody else. Oh, I might have to move. I might have to, meet new people and convince them to vote for me. That's the complaints I'm getting from your side of the aisle. And by the way, if we had done what you're asking and worried about those things, that map would be illegal, because we're not allowed to favor or disfavor particular people in the drawing of these maps. And so, I would close by saying that we have here a map that if things were drawn fairly from the start, it would have looked something like this. Now, maybe you wouldn't have an artificial majority all these decades, but that's not why we're here, to worry about whether you would have that or not. We're here to make sure these communities are united. And since it was brought up, I just do want to clarify for the record, the Washington Post has not opined that these maps should be overturned. There was an opinion page where they asked for someone to write in favor of the maps and someone to write in opposition to the maps. And so there were columns next to each other from individuals not speaking for the paper that presented either side of the argument. Mr. President, we're very proud of the maps we've produced. People of this state are finally going to have the representation they deserve, and I proudly vote yes.
Senator Gianaris to be recorded in the affirmative. Senator Jordan to explain her vote.
The majority's map proves the mantra that we hear today, that power corrupts and absolute power corrupts absolutely. Make no mistake, these maps are the result of the majority's corrupt process. They are the result of the majority's failure to respect and respond to the will of New Yorkers. They are the result of political partisanship run amok. And these maps utterly fail to fulfill the promise of truly independent redistricting that New Yorkers wanted, that New Yorkers voted for twice, and what New Yorkers deserved. It's a shameful attempt to try rigging the process, politically gerrymander districts, and deliberately disenfranchise voters and communities of interest. By choosing to draw their own partisan maps, Democrats deliberately chose to ignore the will of hundreds of New Yorkers and countless communities of interest. The majority is looking to protect its own political power and not reflect or serve the will of the people. Redistricting was supposed to be independent and not driven by partisan politics. That's what voters wanted. That's what voters were promised, and that's what these maps should have reflected. Yet this measure does the exact opposite and flouts the will of the people. I'm going to quote that Washington Post opinion page because it's appropriate. New York's Democratic gerrymander is egregious. The courts must intervene. That was said about the congressional maps. It applies to the maps today. And to my Greek friend, Senator Gianaris, I say this in our native Greek language, dropi. That means shame. Shame on you.
Senator Jordan, we have reached 2 minutes. Please wrap your remarks up.
These maps are a shameless example of politically partisan gerrymandering at its worst. I vote no.
Senator Jordan to be recorded in the negative. Senator Helming to explain her vote.
Mr. President, the people of this state have repeatedly expressed their desire for a fair and independent redistricting process. They voted for this at the ballot box not once but twice. New Yorkers made it very clear they wanted their voices to be heard and they wanted to be represented in this process. Instead, the Senate majority has chosen to ignore the voice of the people. And that's not just my opinion, it's shared by legal and political experts from across the state who have referred to the proposed districts as partisan gerrymandering. Michael Lee, senior counsel for the Democracy Program at the Brennan Center for Justice, was quoted in the New York Times saying it's a master class in how to draw an effective gerrymander. He added, sometimes you do need fancy metrics to tell, but a map that gives Democrats 85% of the seats in a state that is not 85% Democratic, that's not a particularly hard case. The majority members of this body have blatantly disregarded our state constitution and the will of the people of New York State. And to hear it stated over and over again, they're just trying to do the same thing the Republicans did 10 years ago is a blatant falsehood. 10 years ago, there was balance and collaboration between Senate Republicans, Assembly Democrats, and the Democratic governor. This is why people have lost faith in our state government. We don't need studies to tell us that. However, a recent poll I'm sure many of you have seen that was put out by Unite New York, a bipartisan poll, found that more than 1/3 of New York voters are so frustrated, they're so fed up and frustrated that they're ready to move out of the state. New Yorkers are sick and tired of politics as usual. They're sick and tired of being ignored.
Senator Helming, we have reached 2
deserve
minutes.
better
Please
from our
conclude your
state
remarks.
government, and they deserve better from the legislators in this chamber. Mr. President, I cannot in good conscience vote in favor of an outcome that expressly ignores the will of the people. I stand with my constituents and New Yorkers from across this state and vote no on this legislation.
Senator Helming to be recorded in the negative. Senator White to explain her vote.
Today we were told quite a few lies, and they're lies. We were told that a computer in a cloud generated maps. Maps that were drawn on purpose, and we've been listening to this since I took a district from a Democrat. I was told since day one that map was going to be drawn and it was going to be changed when the census came out, and it was going to be the first minority district. What a coincidence. What a coincidence that is when we see it all over social media posts. Not only do we have a supermajority, but we're going to redistrict the hell out of New York. Can't wait. What a coincidence that is. It seems we have sour grapes being harbored by the Democrats, which is laughable. We have 43 Democrats sitting across the aisle accusing 20 Republicans that 10 years ago maps were drawn unfairly. That's laughable. When was the last time Republicans held a supermajority? I dare you to look up the history because it's never. The Republicans have never held a supermajority in the state of New York. How many senators found themselves drawn into the same district? I can tell you the answer. Senator Janoris did not know the answer. It was 4. They were all Republican. And although he'll lie and tell you the purpose of drawing those maps and changing those maps was to unite like districts with common interests. Senator Janoris, pull out a map, and I dare you to look to see. You did not unite any new district in Senate District number 3. You simply cut out where I live. That's all you did. You did not unite one common community that was not already united. New Yorkers should be mad.
Senator White, we have reached 2 minutes. Please conclude your remarks.
This is a disgrace and it's a shame. And we, New Yorkers, have not had their voices heard for 2 years. New Yorkers need to have their voices heard. And for that, I vote absolutely not.
Senator White to be recorded in the negative. Might I remind the House to keep your comments related to the content of the bill. Senator Serino to explain her vote.
Thank you, Mr. President. This is a sad day for democracy in New York. These maps have been blatantly gerrymandered to benefit the majority party at the state and the federal levels, and as a result, they completely disregard the will of the people of New York who voted overwhelmingly in support of an independent redistricting process. You know, I've heard a lot throughout this process about what happened 10 years ago with redistricting, as if that somehow justifies what is being advanced now. Let me be clear, it does not. I wasn't here 10 years ago. In fact, most of us in here now were not. But those running this chamber today sold New Yorkers a bill of goods about change, only to prove the old adage correct. Absolute power only corrupts absolutely, because real leaders lead. They don't disregard the clear will of the voters because it's politically convenient. Independent districting was a chance to do this right. What's happening today is an abject failure and an insult to the very people that we are all elected to serve. New Yorkers absolutely deserve better. I'll be voting no today, Mr. President, and I urge my colleagues on the other side of the aisle to find their conscience. Do what's right. Put the people of New York ahead of political party and reject this bill. I vote no, Mr. President.
Senator Severino to be recorded in the negative. Senator Ort to explain his vote.
Thank you, Mr. President. I want to thank my colleagues, all of whom have participated in this debate. I want to thank the members of my conference who have stood up, and you can hear the palpable anger, frustration. And I want to be clear, it's not about the people in this room. It's about the people who sent us to this room. This legislation, I heard in the beginning of the debate, the sponsor said, we debate all kinds of legislation here. We pass legislation all the time. And that's true. We pass bad bills all the time in the last several years. But this might be the worst. But here's the difference. There's no other legislation that we've passed since I've been here that eliminates 2 members from our conference. This bill eliminates 2 members from the Republican caucus. Bureaucrats, or as my colleague said, civil servants, unelected, elected by no one, have removed 2 elected officials in this map. That's why you hear frustration today. Now, my colleagues across the aisle, Senator, the sponsor, has talked about what's happened in the past. Now, he's much older than me, so he's been here longer than me. But I think it's important to note there's one difference. There's one difference this time. We didn't have a constitutional amendment all those times in the past. Now, how do you get to a constitutional amendment? We've talked about the past a lot. How about we talk about 2014? That's when the people in New York voted to enshrine in our state constitution. They thought that they should decide who represents them and that we shouldn't get to decide who we represent. And that's why they passed an independent redistricting commission and an independent redistricting process. Now, that process, flawed, but a first of its kind here in New York, held public hearings all across the state, took in testimony from communities of interest, however you define them, all across the state. New York City, Western New York, North Country, Central New York, Hudson Valley, Long Island. And when it failed, when the commissioners could not reach a conclusion, LAT4 took it over. Legislative Apportionment Task Force. I know where it is. It's at 250 Broadway because there's a giant sign down the hall from my office. Our appointee, Senator Lanza, he's our LAT4 appointee. He's the co-chair of the task force, and he never attended one meeting. Not one public hearing was held on a map that affects 20 million people. Now, you heard we took into account communities of interest. I have a letter here from the IRC to me, as well as my colleagues, the Speaker, the Majority Leader, and the Minority Leader of the Assembly. The enclosed flash drive contains files which are in the possession of the New York State Independent Redistricting Commission. These files include all public testimony that has been submitted to the IRC, including testimony that was received after the plans were submitted to the legislature on January 3rd. Please let me know if you have any questions. The problem with this, Mr. President, it was received by me, and it's date stamped February 2nd. That's yesterday for those keeping score at home. Yesterday. These maps were in print Monday night. So I would be hard, unless this information was received earlier by my colleagues, they didn't take it into account. That's the point. It was a sham from their perspective from the beginning. That's the point. They didn't care what the testimony was because they already knew what was going to happen. That's the point. And this proves it. And as long as we're talking about keeping communities together, I have to sort of chuckle because I represent currently the city of Niagara Falls, which once upon a time, I guess somebody decided that should be within Niagara County. Makes sense, right? Now, Niagara Falls, lest anyone think it's a bastion of conservative thought, is not. And yet, I have represented it in my 8 years in the Senate. But somebody decided that we're going to take Niagara Falls out of the district that the rest of Niagara County is in. And we're going to put it with a different county and a different city. So I know we can cherry pick these examples, but this is about process, a process that the voters decided they wanted, a process that was undermined, a process that failed, and now we're stuck with the same process, gerrymandering. And it doesn't matter who does it, it's wrong. And you don't get to make the argument that it happened to us, we're fixing it. You're just providing a different solution, a different answer to the same problem that has plagued this state for many years. And that's why you hear communities of interest, different groups across the state who are saying our vote has been diluted. And it's not an accident. There's a member of the majority who was facing off in a primary, and that district is better for him. There was a significant group in that district that no longer exists to the same strength and representation that they had in his current Senate district. So when someone talks about incumbency protection, that's almost the definition of it. This is a flawed process, Mr. President. It's not a transparent process. It is the same result for New Yorkers, only a different part of the party is controlling it. And we're losing representation as a result, and New York City is picking up 2 additional seats as a result. That's a power shift, that's a power grab, and it doesn't serve this state. It does not serve this state well, and I believe it's in violation of our own Constitution, and that is why I urge all my colleagues to vote in the negative.
Senator Ort to be recorded in the negative. Majority Leader Andrea Stewart-Cousins to close.
Thank you, Mr. President. I am certainly happy to say that we followed a process. We followed a process that had been put in place by the former majority. We followed a process that said that this commission, which as we know, it was comprised in the way that the former majority said it should be comprised. We put it together. We adhered to every single stipulation of the commission, and we adhered to every single parameter once the commission was not able to conclude its work. There was countless testimony that was considered, understood, and we got it. And the results today are a result of following a process that was put in place again by the former majority that have concluded today with the passage of these new maps. I remember when I ran first, my district was a rectangle looking, and after there was so much consternation and the former majority said that there would be signed pledges indeed, saying that they were never going to do anything that wasn't bipartisan or nonpartisan. And at the end of that, I had, instead of a rectangle, I always say, I had a district that was the smiling profile of an old man with a scraggly beard. He earned a name because there were so many different places that were sort of sketched and etched together that I had to name him. He was the personification of what gerrymandering looked like. In that time, not only were we going through a great recession, but while everybody was tightening their belts, somehow the former majority thought it was fine to add a seat. Not only did they add a seat, but they added a seat where there had been no population growth. So let me assure you that not only did we follow the rules that the former majority put in place, we then accepted our responsibility as laid out by the former majority, and we did service to the people of New York by actually reflecting where the population growth is, by reflecting what it is that the majority of New Yorkers wanted us to do, draw fair maps that would stand up to scrutiny, because we actually made them contiguous, because we actually didn't do, again, what the former majority did, where Democrats had over 300,000 people in their districts, and the former majority had about 285,000. We have adhered to the variables, the variations. We've adhered to not breaking up things, and we have reflected where the population growth really is. So, Mr. President, I vote aye. Thank you.
Majority Leader Stuart Cousins to be recorded in the affirmative. Announce the results.
In relation to calendar 421, those senators voted in the negative are Senators Akshar, Borrello, Boyle, Gallivan, Griffo, Helming, Jordan, Lanza, Martucci, Matera, Oberacker, O'Mara, Ort, Palumbo, Rath, Ritchie, Sereno, Steck, Tedisco, and White. Ayes 43, nays 20.
The bill is passed. Senator Gianaris.
Mr. President, I believe we've agreed to restore the remaining bill, 8197, to the non-controversial calendar. Can we do that and take that up, please?
On consent, the bill has been placed back on the non-controversial calendar. There is a substitution at the desk. The Secretary will read.
Senator Gianaris moves to discharge from the Committee on Rules. Assembly Bill number 9168 is substituted for the identical Senate Bill 8197, third reading calendar 423.
Substitution so ordered. Secretary will read.
Calendar number 423, Assembly number 9168 by Assembly Member Zabrowski, an act to amend the state law.
Read the last section.
Section 4 of this act shall take effect on the same date and in the same manner as the chapter of the laws of 2022.
Call the roll.
Addabbo, Gianaris, Kruger, Ort, Stewart, Cousins, White.
Announce the results.
In relation to calendar 423, those senators voted in the negative are Senators Akshar, Borrello, Boyle, Gallivan, Griffo, Helming, Jordan, Lanza, Martucci, Matera, Oberacker, O'Mara, Ort, Palumbo, Rath, Ritchie, Sereno, Steck, Tedisco, and White. Ayes 43, nays 20.
The bill is passed. Senator Gianaris, that completes the reading of today's calendar.
Thank you, Mr. President. Can you please announce that at the conclusion of session, there will be an immediate meeting of the Finance Committee virtually?
At the conclusion of session, there will be a virtual finance meeting.
And please recognize Senator Lanza for an announcement.
Senator Lanza.
Thank you, Senator Gianaris. Mr. President, there will be an immediate and brief meeting of the Republican Conference in room 315 of the Capitol building.
There will be an immediate brief meeting of the Republican Conference in the Capitol room 315.
The business at the desk.
There is no further business at the desk.
Move to adjourn until Monday, February 7th at 3 p.m., intervening days being legislative days.
On motion, the Senate stands adjourned until Monday, February 7th at 3 p.m. with the intervening days being legislative.